Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right. Okay, so before I get to some of the historical things, I want to share the theme verse for 2023, and that's right there, Titus 2:14. So it's within the larger passage from Titus 2:11 to 14. Let me just read that passage. For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age, while we wait for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all wickedness and to purify for himself a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. So that passage, that redeemed for redemptive living, is taken from this passage in Titus chapter 2, especially verse 14. Christ has redeemed us from all wickedness, and he has purified for himself a people that are his very own and who are characterized by the desire to do or have the eagerness to do what is good. So I am encouraging all of us to really reflect on Titus 2:14, preferably from 2:11 to 14, throughout this year in 2023, and really think about what it means to live as redeemed people of God, to live redemptive lives wherever God places us. And to live a redemptive life, as I have preached a couple of weeks ago, is really about placing restoration of relationships first through forgiveness and reconciliation. And second is really committing ourselves to building a very healthy community, strong and healthy faith community by serving and sharing with one another. And finally, sharing hospitality to people who are outside, who are needy, so that we enter into new relationships that God would use us to bless them. So that's what redemptive living is, and I invite you to really think through this throughout this year. And I know that the pastoral team, myself included, will be preaching a series from the Cape Town commitment on 6 topics on how to live out the gospel in this world shortly. I think starting in February, correct? Yeah, February. So let's all think through this. Also, a couple more points before I get to the main session is that year 2023, we are finally coming out of the pandemic. So that means we need to be much more active than what we have been in the past 3 years. So feel free to get involved in small groups. Feel free to sign up and go on overseas mission trips. Feel free to do a lot of things that perhaps we were not allowed to do in the last 3 years. Because we really want to see our church to get into full gear of things, if you will. And I've been saying the same thing in our Korean-speaking congregation as well. Let's not hold anything back. Let's really go for the whole, with 100% energy that God gives us. And so we really want to expand our sphere of influence in 2023. And I appreciate also every one of you really committed to CoaH, and you have given very faithfully last year. And I think we will have the financial report later on, but I think we've also exceeded our expectations. And so I want to encourage you to keep giving in 2023 as well, because with the strong finance, we are able to do a lot of things God has called us to do. I am very pleased that in KM as well, our offering has been very, very good in 2022. In fact, it just caught me by surprise. I think KM is following the EM or CoaH trend. The last 3 weeks in December, people gave so much, just unbelievably. Yeah, and I was wondering where did our KM members learn this behavior? And I know that CoaH does this every year, right? The last couple of weeks, everybody just gives. Yeah. But anyway, same thing happened in KM as well this year. Okay, so I'm about to present. It's really more than just the history of YoungNak Church. It's really about not only the history, looking back, but also looking forward. So based on what we see in the past, where are we going as a community of believers? And I want to also say at the outset that it is not the official version of the history of YoungNak Church. It's extremely private version, because I can only access the set of photographs that I have in my computer. And so I'm not even going to say that this reflects the development of CoaH. In fact, it's just a patchwork of whatever files, photo files I have, okay? So you need to really forgive me for this. Okay, where am I? Okay, we sang this already, so let's not sing again. It's the other one, okay. Okay. Just keep going, okay. Almost there, okay. There it is, okay. Let me begin. Hold on. Let me begin by saying the importance of understanding history, because it gives us a sense of our roots, and roots are important. Roots are not everything, but roots are where we come from, and knowing where we come from, we can then now see where we should go. So, the first Korean immigrant churches in Toronto started in 1960s. The first one was at Bloor and near Harvard. The United Church of Korean, I think it was called the Korean United Church on Bloor Street. And around the same time, in 1968, there was another church that started called TKPC, Toronto Korean Presbyterian Church, at Davenport Avenue and Davenport Road and Oakwood Road. And today that church is now in the hands of another Korean congregation called Galilee Presbyterian Church. But anyways, so these two churches are about 10 years ahead of YoungNak. YoungNak last November celebrated the 45th anniversary. These two churches celebrated their 55th anniversary. But those two churches have gone through some, coincidentally, went through some sad splits in the past. The TKPC being the most recent split, just this past few months ago, through all this, the same-sex marriage and the definition issue in Presbyterian Church in Canada. But anyway, that's our beginning in 1960s, at the end of 1960s. YoungNak Church comes along about 10 years later, in 1977. We rented a building, and the church building still stands at Don Mills United Church, Don Mills at Pape and O'Connor, 126 O'Connor Drive. Now that church, I think some of us here are from that era. Like Brian, you remember this church, right? What I did not know, my office used to be in the basement, the way back. You just go down the steps right to the end of the building, and my office was downstairs. Basically, I cleaned out closet or some storage space, and I claimed it as my office. And I was working in that office for many months until one day it occurred to me that I was having fellowship with the saints who are buried just outside, same level because my office is in the basement. It really humbled me. YoungNak Church outgrew that facility very quickly. By the way, Reverend Ann Shantz, who we knew from 30 years ago, she's still the pastor there. It's unbelievable. She's probably in her 70s now, but she's still the pastor there. YoungNak Church was, the congregation was threatening us to leave because our children were too noisy and the smell of kimchi was too strong. But it was Reverend J.G. MacDonald who came to our rescue every time when the Canadian congregation they were saying like, we've had enough of this congregation. I learned that Reverend MacDonald, who was the pastor before Reverend Shantz, actually he was born, did you know, he was born in North Korea, Hamhung, North Korea, to missionary parents. So he's an MK, and he stood his ground and said, you will not let these people leave because I identify with them. So by his protection, some of his protection, we were able to stay there for some time. We eventually outgrew the host congregation and had to look for a space. Now, according to the sociologist Pyung-Gap Min, who taught at Queens College in New York, that he said that immigrant churches meet for at least to meet 4 social functions. And they are, number 1, to meet your other, whether it's Korean or whatever other ethnic groups, you meet because you want to speak the language and share the food. Number 2, you meet as an ethnic congregation because you want to pass down your cultural values, language to your next generation. Number 3, you meet as an immigrant congregation because what the church provides for the recent immigrants in terms of social network, where jobs can be found, how to send your kids to school, etc., etc. These are important things, and so it provides a very important social function. And finally, in the immigrant church, when you become an officer, in some ways it gives you that social status that you lost when you used to have back in your host country. So these are at least 4 social reasons he identified, and I think, for the most part, I think he makes a lot of sense. Now here we have the first and the second senior pastor, Reverend Kim on the left, and Reverend Lee, the successor, second pastor. So the way I arranged the presentation today is really based on 3 senior pastors. So Reverend Kim, who was the senior pastor from 1977 to 89, and then Reverend Lee from 1989 to 2004, and then myself afterwards. So it's divided into 3 sections like that. So Reverend Jagon Kim, who by the way is father of Carol and father-in-law of Michael, was born in Pyongyang. He told me he was the last child of some 8 or 9 siblings, and his mother always told him that you should become a missionary, because his mother was influenced by a very famous missionary to Korea by the name of Samuel Moffett, who was instrumental in founding a Pyongyang theological seminary, which became the mother seminary for most major seminaries in Korea today. And so growing up his mother being influenced by Samuel Moffett, she always told him that he should become a missionary. And so he fulfills that dream after he retires from YoungNak. So he founds this church in 1977, and he led this congregation for 12 years. And I think his ministry is characterized by one of the servant's heart. He was famous for just having the heart of service. He would love to take you out for meals. Now, I remember 2 times, even before I became a pastoral staff of YoungNak, he bought me 2 meals. I had nothing to do with YoungNak, but he still somehow found ways to treat me twice. And so, that's kind of shows you how servant's heart, the kind of servant's heart that he had. Finally, after he retires from this church at the age of 67, he goes to St. Petersburg. Back then it was still Soviet Union, so it was called Leningrad. I think it was in 1989, 1990, around that time, just before the breakdown of the Soviet Union. And here's a very interesting story. And boy, I really have to watch my time because tell me like I'm still at the first 5% of the, so I'm in big trouble. But I want to tell you this story. So he goes to Soviet Union, not having a single contact in that area and not knowing how to speak Russian, period. Talk about having that kind of brave, I don't know how to describe this. Like you go to a mission field, you have no contact, you don't speak the language, you just go, you know what I mean? How would you characterize that kind of spirit? Anyway, he did that, and he stayed there for a week. And staying in St. Peter, in Leningrad, and not having any contact, he was getting a little bit nervous and desperate. So he goes down to the river, and then as he coming up, he's praying to God, Lord, if you will allow me to work here, I want some kind of contact, please. And so he was praying very desperately. And as he came up the river bank, he sees for the very first time, he has never seen for the past week that he was in Russia, never seen a Korean face. He sees this Korean face for the very first time. So he's so happy. He goes and he grabs him and says, are you Korean? And of course, in Korean he spoke that, right? But the other person cannot speak Korean because turns out that this person is what they call gareski, meaning someone who migrated to Russian territory, and I think he was like 2nd or 3rd generation. So he didn't speak Korean, but he led Reverend Kim to his house where his aged mother was, and his mother was able to communicate with him in Korean. And that was the beginning of a miraculous connection. And it turns out the man's wife, Mija Kim, same name as my wife, Mija, but Mija Kim, not Mija Song. She eventually became Reverend Kim's personal interpreter. And through this family, the church was planted, and not just the church, but a number of churches were planted, and eventually a seminary was founded. And I'll be able to show you that. Now, this is a picture taken at the Red Square in Moscow in 1993. And you will see very fresh looks of Don McIsaac at the back, Ed Chung in the front, myself, some others, Mikey, and I believe it's Alfred in the background with his face down, and right next to him is Jessica, and Lincoln in the background, and some others. And this is a rare photo of 3 pastors all present. And when I visited him, I think this is taken around 2006 or 7. This is the construction site of the church and the seminary in St. Petersburg. And after his passing, the seminary and the church was completed. What you see, the building front is the seminary, and behind with that triangle kind of shape, that's the church. And inside the church, this is what it looks like, St. Petersburg Presbyterian Church. So if you go today to St. Petersburg, you will see the church that he founded and the seminary that he founded. And now moving on to second senior pastor. He was a young man when he came to our church. He was only 34 years old. And he took over the senior pastor role when he was 36 years old. And for 15 years until he died until his death at age of 51. For the 15 years that he worked, he was able to really bring this church to another level altogether. I have never seen in my life as a pastor who worked harder than him. Never seen anyone like it. I mean, if you stay with him, you get burnt out. He drives you like in every direction. So Q and Tim, like what I'm doing with you is like nothing. Like this is like holiday every day, you know. With him, how we do 2 weeks early rise prayer meeting at the beginning of each year. For him, it was 7 weeks. So it didn't end until the middle of February. And while this is going on for 7 weeks, he ordered everyone, all the pastoral staff, to go on a full visitation of every single house during those 7 weeks. So I don't know how he did it, but you look back in hindsight, I mean, that drive was so strong, the desire to make the church grow, I mean, that under that church growth model, that was all great. But perhaps in hindsight, he should have taken care of his health. And so, unfortunately, he died at the age of 51. But he left behind tremendous legacy of what we call today YoungNak Church, with 2-track education system, KM and AM, 2 building projects, the Bartley Drive building, plus 650 McNichol. I mean, each time, when we move to a new facility like that, you have to remember there is so much sacrifice that goes on in church members' lives. I remember when I was a pastor when I first came at YoungNak, like I told you, the church was growing out of, it was just getting too small for us. We were already like congregation of 200, 300 people, including children. And there was no way we could stay at O'Connor Drive. So the place that came up was basically a warehouse on Bartley Drive near Eglinton and Victoria Park. Well, in those days, interest rate was worse than what is today. I think it was like 7-8%. It was horrible. And to be able to come up with $1 million or $2 million, that was like monumental task. Today, a single house may have a mortgage of $1 million, but 30 years ago, that was like such a gamble you had to take. So immigrants, we don't have money, so what do? I remember I going to a bank and seeing loans officer. I said, I need to borrow money. And he said, okay, well, let's work out some numbers here. He asked me, like, are you going to buy a car? No, I'm not buying a car. Surely this is not enough for your down payment. Are you trying to buy a house? No, I'm not trying to buy a house. What are you going to do with this money? I'm going to give it as an offering to church. He looked at me and almost like he was looking at me with this kind of message, like, what do you mean? Did I hear you right? You're taking out a loan to give an offering to church? I've never seen a client like that. But that's the way it was. And so elders, deacons, pastoral staff, like many of them mortgaged their houses. I did not own a house, so I had to go and borrow money from the bank. And that's how we came together, like million or whatever amount that was needed to purchase the Bartley Drive sanctuary. And it took years and years to pay that off. So he was instrumental in moving our congregation from a rented space to a warehouse. And while we were at Bartley Drive, I think it was from 1992 to 1996 or 7 around, but it only took 5 years for the church to outgrow that facility again. So the church was around maybe 700-800 members, and there was no way we could basically, by the way, Bartley Drive and Don McIsaac, he made the steps, which was crooked. Did you remember? Yeah. The steps were crooked. Each time I stepped down, like my back hurt, because it wasn't correct. So I say that to you because everybody helped out in building that, turning the warehouse into a respectful sanctuary. Everybody worked very hard. But a lot of church members today will say those days were the best days of our lives because we weren't asking for a lot. We weren't asking for a mega church with the best facility, the latest state of whatever. But everything we worked hard with our hands, and we presented this to God. And so he was spearheading this whole thing, and I think we should be very grateful for the legacy that he left behind. It was under his leadership that we adopted the Kyrgyz people of Central Asia, and till this day, YoungNak Church is very, very well known and respected in Kyrgyzstan amongst missionaries for our commitment to that people group. Don and Jenny spent almost 20 years almost of their lives as commissioned missionaries in Kyrgyzstan, among other things we've done. But anyway, so I can't say enough about him. He basically gave all he had for YoungNak. But it was March of 2004, I get a phone call while I was serving as a missionary in the Philippines. I get a call from Peter Yi. He says, I want you to pray for Pastor Lee because he's in grave situation. So as you know, like he had a biopsy suspecting he may have prostate cancer. He had a biopsy, but in the process of getting a tissue out, he was infected with what they call the superbug in the hospital. And so he got this test done on Wednesday morning, and then he was already having high fever in the afternoon and evening, and then he lost his consciousness and died early hours of Saturday morning. So I think Peter must have called me around Thursday or Friday asking that I also pray for him and so on. And then Peter calls me again and says, he passed away and the church is asking you to come and preach at his funeral service. And I'm going like, what is going on here? Yeah. So that's the March of 2004. Actually, he and we were very close. Very close. I worked under him for 12 years, and he confided in me many things. And so we shared a lot of things. And he told me, look, when you come back after your first term in the Philippines, you'll have your sabbatical. That was the year 2004 and 2005. He said, I want you to come and take care of YoungNak Church so I can go on sabbatical myself. And I said, no, that's not fair. I'm coming here to rest, and you're leaving this church to me? No way. So we had our emails going back and forth, and we negotiated. Okay, I will preach once a month. I will preach whatever, this and that. And so we agreed. And then he passed away. So that was, I really felt like, wow, I feel indebted, and I need to do something about it. And that's when the church asked me to come back from the field, I think that's one of the reasons I came back, is because he and we exchanged a lot of emails about that year, that particular year, 2004, how I was supposed to cover for him while he was gone. But anyway, this is the warehouse I was telling you about, and used to be just a flat horizontally. That vertical shape is just a bit of a add-on, just to make it look like a church. Okay. Now, Reverend Lee was asking me like, hey, what do you think we should do? We're outgrowing this facility. Should we buy a building right below, right next to us, and so on? And I told him, if I was the senior pastor, I would not buy the building next door. I would actually relocate, because this is inside the industrial area. It's hard for people to get to, because you have to get off the bus stop and then walk good 10, 15 minutes, right? And so I said, no, if I were you, I would actually relocate. He actually, I think he took that as a very pleasant alternative. And I was, at the time, I was away in Chicago, finishing up my doctorate. And he said, and when I came back, he said, look what I have done. We bought this facility, and now it's here, 650 Magnicol Avenue. He told me there were a number of elders who opposed this whole idea. In fact, with the exception of one elder, everybody opposed, he said, initially anyway. So he had to climb over this huge mountain to try and convince the elders. But eventually all the elders came on board. They mortgaged their houses and came up with a down payment for this building. I forget how much we paid for this from the sales of that and then the difference, but still we had several $1 million of mortgage that we had to take out. In 2011, more than 10 years ago, we paid for the whole mortgage. We burned the mortgage, if you will. So this building is mortgage-free. For those of you who own houses with big mortgages, you know what I mean. Like, you don't have to go through that stress. There is no monthly payment that goes to the bank for this particular building here. It's all completely paid for. And we ought to be grateful to people, pioneers, who've laid who laid the foundation. Now, this was a photo taken in 1995 and 1996, and I don't know how well you can see. Let me just the front row only, okay, just as an example. Many of them are no longer with us. They are with the Lord, okay? So we have Kim Gugil 장로님, Elder Kim Gugil, on the far left front row. He's still alive in his 80s. Right next to him is 이 창명 장로님. That's Robin's dad, Robin and James. James came by during the New Year service. I was so glad to see him. His father, who I think is the longest serving elder in YoungNak history of serving as an elder for 27 years. But he also passed away in his late 60s. Kim Chi-guk, Elder Kim Chi-guk, we used to kid him because it sounds like kimchi-guk, but which is like kimchi soup, right? Yeah. But anyway, that's his real name, Kim Chi-guk. And again, he passed away early. A lot of our elders have a tendency to die before they're 70 years old. And maybe it has to do with extra commitment and sacrifice that they've made. And then right next to is 이찬진 장로님, father of Richard Lee, Pastor Richard Lee, and Lyra's father, yeah. And right next is 정 장로님, right? That's 박영도. Okay, sorry, my screen is very small, so. That's 박영도 목사. He's a pastor, associate pastor who is now senior pastor in Windsor, and then Reverend Lee who passed away, and then next is myself, and then next is 강덕성 장로님. That's the father of Daniel Kang, and next is 정 장로님, 정삼열 장로님, father of James and Ed Chang, passed away also. Kang 장로님 also passed away. They all passed away, I think, before they were 70 years old. Yeah. Right next to him is, I believe, is Jang Won-hak 장로님. He's alive. He's almost 80. 이영국 장로님, he's still, like, he's very weak and frail now. He's just very slowly walking. And next is Peter Yi. He had just arrived in our community a few months earlier. Missing in this picture is Im Gano 장로님. I don't know where he is. He may be somewhere. That's Alfred's father. Somewhere, he must be there somewhere. But anyway, just to give you an idea of just one front row, these are incredible elders that led this congregation, this community. Like I said, they mortgaged their houses to purchase the warehouse, eventually this 650 Magnical Avenue, and so on. Can you recognize some faces like Michael in the background, Mike Lee also? Yeah. This is the Bartley days. Yeah. And this is also Bartley days. This is a commissioning service of Don and Jenny and Caleb to Kyrgyzstan in 1999. Yeah. That's like many pounds ago, wasn't it? I don't have to mention that. Yeah. Look at the directory. Like, I was able to find these things in my file, but yeah. So CoaH, what used to be known as EM, goes back way, way early, like way back. I think as early as 1990s, 1990, 91, something like that. And some faces. I think in the background is my face, and right next to is, I think it's James Kim. Correct? I think so. Yeah. And this is the set of photos I found just before 1 or 2 weeks before I left for the Philippines. These are some of the couples that were active at the time. And some are still very active. In fact, all are still very active. Or maybe not, I'm not sure. And of course, this particular space right here, this one, is that construction, okay? That's how it became. So basically, this whole facility used to be like owned by a computer company, and there were wires going underneath all over the place. We basically took out one half of the whole building and built the sanctuary and gymnasium. But the other half, divided by the firewall, is still the original computer company's offices, and that still is, that portion is all much older. And finally, I arrived in 2004 after getting a call from the Philippines, or while I was in the Philippines getting a call, so I come back in 2004. And okay, so some of the things that when I came back for the past almost 20 years, these are some things I try to focus on, to try and really encourage the congregation to become missional church. And I'll explain that shortly, a little bit more. And so I think I would like to be remembered as a pastor who really believed in training and equipping God's people. And so there were many, many nights I stayed up and stayed at church to train church members. And also ministry to various ethnic groups. And so you see in the afternoon on Sundays, you see the Thai church, the Vietnamese church, the Myanmar church. I think this is well worth saying about the birth of Thai church. So there is no Thai congregation in Canada, at least in 2005 or so, when we first thought about this idea. We came across a couple, we meaning myself and my associate pastor, missions pastor back then, we came across a couple who are from Thailand of Chinese background. But when they came to Canada as immigrants, they were busy sharing the gospel with people from China. So we challenged them. Sue and Frank are their names. We challenged them and we said, why don't you share the gospel with Thai-speaking people instead of Mandarin or Cantonese-speaking people? Because we have many people who can share the gospel with these Chinese-speaking people, but we don't have any with the Thai people. They said, well, we would like to, but for 2-3 years that we've been in Canada, we've never heard Thai speakers. So we said, why don't you pray about that? At least let the Lord lead you. And so they agreed. And then about a week later, while they were shopping in a supermarket, they heard someone speak in Thai. They were pleasantly surprised and took it as a sign from the Lord that they should plant a Thai church. And they did. So fast forward several years, Thai congregation was born, and 30, 40 Thai people were actually baptized as a result of their ministry. I still remember at their 1-year anniversary, church anniversary, like this whole place was packed with Thai people. Included in the meeting were Thai Buddhists, because even though they had different religion, they were so glad that there was something Thai going on. So they came, and the consulate general, someone sent from that office as well. So Sue and Frank were so encouraged because coming from Thailand, they know how difficult it is to share the gospel and see one person fully transform into a Thai Christian. They said it's very, very difficult. But seeing like 30, 40 people getting baptized in Canada, they were so encouraged that they decided to wrap up their life in Toronto, and they went back to Bangkok to plant a church in Bangkok, and they did. And for 5 years, they planted a church, and then passed it on to a local Thai pastor, and then they came back. And when they came back, they found that the very church that they left behind was in a bit of a difficult situation, so they had to now it's a rebuilding process again. But anyway, there's still Thai church that's meeting in our facility at 2 o'clock in Sunday afternoons. Right from the get-go, we made it our point that we will not ask them to pay any rental, that we do not treat them as tenants and we are landlord. No, it is more like brothers and sisters in Christ, and we will help them come along and develop as congregations. And still, that's the relationship. The birth of CMCA is amazing. So Pastor John Chung, who was our missions pastor for about 10 years, he left YoungNak to found a mission agency called CMCA, which is dedicated to equipping other churches to do ethnic ministries in GTA. And so now he's retired, but his successor is continuing carrying that on. Living Fountain Orphanage, I'll be able to show you the pictures later. That's another thing. Young Center Plus, Joy Fountain Kindergarten in Dominican Republic, YoungNak Retreat Center. These are some of the things that I focused in my tenure. So vision trip to Cambodia took place in 2005 with the idea of building orphanage, and eventually the orphanage came to being. We learned a lot through this process. How many of you have personally been to this orphanage? Wow, that many. That's incredible. Great. And while this was in operation, we had people from the village across the street came to us and said, wow, this is like so nice. I mean, like, this is a very nice building in comparison to what other things that are standing around, right? And they said, could we send our children to this place even though they're not orphans? And that's when we realized that we made a huge mistake, that we were busy taking care of orphans and neglecting the needs of the communities around. So we built another building, smaller than this, but another building called the community center. And to that community center, we said any kids can come and do whatever activities. So there was programs before school and after school. We taught them English, art, like things like that, plus computer. Now, would you believe when the orphanage started, there was no electricity in this area. So we had to ask the government to place electric poles for about 1.5 kilometers. And in the process of bringing electricity to this area, the whole village received their electricity, and they were forever grateful to us. And then eventually the city also put a pipelines for the water to be supplied as well. So the whole area became very nice as a result of this orphanage and the community center that we are running. And eventually, a church was planted inside the village, and people are very welcoming of us, even till this day. There is a very heartwarming story about the community center. Before the pandemic, I think on the average about 200 kids used the facility before and after the school. And one time, because these kids, they were learning English, and they were like opening their eyes to the world outside. Their parents were waiting for their daughters to finish high school so that they can send the daughters to nearby factories where they are part of manufacturing shoes and pants and things like that. And they will make like $100 a month and so on. And this is a very nice and steady income for the families. So parents are always waiting for their kids to finish high school, and then they would send them to these factories. Our missionaries, Anne and the other couple, they challenged these village families and said, would you allow your daughters, instead of going to factories and work, allow them to go to university? Now, this has never been done before, right? Allow them to go to university, finish their 4-year program, and they will make a lot more money, and they'll really do something useful with their lives as they want. So it took some convincing, but eventually some parents allowed. And so many, many years ago, I think 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more, 3 girls from one of the villages decided to take up on this offer and went to Royal Phnom Penh University, which is like the top school in Cambodia. And they all finished with teaching degrees. And today they're teachers. And they're receiving probably 2 or 3 times more than what they would have received working in factories. So the parents are very happy. The deal was the parents would sell their cows to make way to prepare for tuition fee. And our church would provide lodging for them in Phnom Penh. And they would actually then take out a part-time job for spending money. And that's how it all came together. So if you haven't had a chance to go to Cambodia, I encourage you to do that. Yeah. And this is, I think in 2018, I think Sophie and Marty. Yeah. And these kids learned English very well. My daughter Pauline was there for, I don't know, 6 months or something like that. So they were asking me as I was leaving, "Sir, when will your daughter come back?" Yeah. I was surprised at their level of English. Okay, moving on to some of the EM. These are the first 10 deacons, I believe, right? Yeah. Nobody had gray hair back then. Yeah. How many years ago was this? Alfred, how many years ago was this? Yeah. My guess is around 2000 and 2004, somewhere in between. So that would be about 20 years ago, right? That's a long time ago. And almost everybody is still very active, yeah. These are some of the KM programs. I've done a lot of marriage enrichment courses. Every spring and fall, I would take on like a group of 20, 30 couples like that, go through like 10 weeks, 12 weeks on marriage counseling, marriage courses, make it fun, and including a weekend retreat where they take on a marriage vows second time around and so on. And the program has been very successful. And I like to claim that YoungNak's divorce rate is much, much lower. I like to claim, yeah. In fact, people that have gone through this program, there are about maybe more than 300 couples that I know of. Very handful of people are separated or divorced today. This is ODS Seminary, or better known as United Seminary in Bishkek, where Don taught some apologetic courses before too. I go there every other year. Our church, did you know, donated $100,000 to renovate the entire facility. And I told him that I ask one thing in making this donation. Would you make a plaque at the entrance of the library in honor of the late Reverend Lee, because he really loved your people. So that's in Russian and in Kyrgyz that this library is dedicated to the name, to the late Reverend Lee. So this is a module that I was part of. In fact, I go there every other year and I teach. Young Center Plus it still is going on in a different location now, but it's the idea of church going to the world rather than asking the world coming to the church. Various programs that were offered. Alpha program has been a great success as well. In KM side, we've run altogether about 30 Alpha courses over the past 15 to 20 years. And hundreds of people came to know Christ through this. Yeah. In fact, most of our baptismal candidates come from this Alpha course. This is another one I want to show you. In 2016 or so, this parcel of land became available. So a missionary who was leaving the country said, I was going to do something with this plot. Could your church take it over and do something with it? Now this plot is in the midst of a slum area, like a shanty town, if you will. And everything is unofficial. Missionary bought this land from the donation from church in New York, but there is no official paper because it's not a properly registered real estate. Later, when the politicians realized there's a lot of votes involved, they made it official. Now it's all registered, but before. So the idea was, how do we develop this land, about half the size of a soccer field, and make it a really useful place for the community. And so there was initial trip that was taken, and eventually a wonderful kindergarten was built. There was a donor who wants to remain anonymous, gave $100,000, but there were other donors as well. To be able to build this two-story kindergarten. Plus, if you look at the background, it's a roof. There's a roof area. That area is very useful now, where the community can come together and do a lot of community functions, including vaccination center and weddings taking place. Very useful place. And this is the church. Pastors retreat. Peter did not play soccer, just for the record. He preferred to go on cycling, but the rest of us, we played soccer together. Yeah. He said he had some knee issues. Yeah. And this was a farewell party for Jane and Uyan. So, okay, so do I have 10 minutes or not? I have 10 minutes, okay. So that's extremely one-sided, unofficial history of YoungNak Church that you've seen from my available photo files. And I'm sorry that I don't have most of your faces in there, okay? So don't take it as an official history. It's just whatever I was able to do. Now, for the balance of my time, about 10 minutes, I want to talk about where do we go from here. So we come from a very strong immigrant roots, where the first generation immigrants made tremendous sacrifice. I want to emphasize that because, like I said, the first generation of elders, for example, many of them died before they reached the age of 70. Sometimes I wonder why, It's probably because of a lot of stress with work, but also extra stress of running the church with tremendous responsibility. Not only the first row that I showed you, about 1/3 of them, maybe even, if not more, all died before 70, but there were others who are not in that picture who also died afterwards, very early, including our second pastor, Reverend Lee. So, this is a very costly thing. A lot of people paid with their finance, but they also paid with their own lives. So, building on that kind of sacrifice and dedication, we as the second generation and beyond, we should really make the most out of it, okay? And one of the reasons, now it's a year and a half ago, when Pastor Peter and others were leaving and so on, I really wanted to encourage those of us who remained to really consider interdependence, that this facility is as much yours as it is for KM members. For KM members, most of them were not part of the O'Connor Drive and Bartley Drive history. In fact, I think that per capita, there are more people in CoaH who understand the life of O'Connor and Bartley than the counterpart in KM. And so, for as long as I'm the senior pastor of this church, I always felt it's unjust for CoaH to receive anything less than what KM would receive. Okay? And so, just breaking away and leaving is not the best answer, in my opinion. If possible, I want CoaH members to stick around for a long, long time and build on the sacrifices and dedications that the previous generations have made. And for those of you who've joined from other churches, you don't have to feel like, well, maybe that doesn't apply to me. No, it still applies to you because your parents and your grandparents also made similar sacrifices in their respective churches. So it doesn't matter. And so we have, in some ways, understanding our roots, we have certain responsibility to make sure that we make the most out of what is given to us, right? So I'm not interested in making sure that YoungNak stays forever. That's not my point. My point is that we as God's people, we continue to serve God's kingdom, utilizing and building on top of the sacrifices that our previous generations have made. So this is my $1 million question. Who would miss us the most Us is referring to YoungNak, or even CoaH. Who would miss us the most if our church no longer existed? It's a loaded question because it's another way of saying, are you making a significant impact outside YoungNak? So much so that people outside will really miss us should we, for whatever reason, cease to exist. When I threw this question to our pastoral staff, one person it's a little funny answer he gave. He said, the Tim Hortons next door. Because their business will go down on Sunday. I said, yeah, right. Give me a better answer. It didn't take much to come up with examples like this. Yeah, they will miss us big time. In fact, not only miss us, these orphans will no longer be supported. They cannot go to school. Yeah, what we're doing is significant after all. In my opinion, there's something missing on the left. But in my opinion, there are three kinds of churches in the world. First is churches that are weak and dying, graying churches. Second, strong and growing, but self-serving, like that church by Joel Austin that I criticize often. You know, that church in Houston, Texas, the largest church in America, 50,000 members, all flocking to Sunday in their huge arena to hear this message that they're all good, they're all okay, God loves them. It's just basically pampering themselves, right? There is no concern about what's going on outside. In fact, that church, I believe it's called Lakewood Church. Lakewood Church was criticized big time when Hurricane Katrina affected the whole area, and people were asking if they could use the church facility. And initially, the church said no. We don't want to allow victims of the hurricane to use. And so this was picked up by a reporter and televised, and so the church was in huge trouble. And they reversed the decision and said, we open our arms wide. Please, anybody, please come. But the damage was already done. It shows you what they've been thinking all along. It's really about self-serving church, right? And you may be a strong church, you may have a multi-million-dollar budget, you may be growing, but as far as the kingdom of God is concerned, you're not doing a whole lot. The third kind of church is missional and kingdom-minded, a church that really exists for other people. And this is where I quote from William Temple, Archbishop of Canterbury, "The Church of Jesus Christ is the only club in the world that exists for the sole benefit of its non-members." And that's the kind of church we want to be. And 1 Peter 2:9 talks about who we are. We are chosen people, royal priesthood, holy nation, God's special possession. And what is our mission? So that we may declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His wonderful light. We have a strong identity, and we have a strong mission in the world. And Jesus said, "As the Father has sent to me, I am sending you." So the church that is only interested in building its own system and making it convenient for its own members and etc., is really not obeying what Jesus has commanded His disciples, that we are to go into the world and be salt and light. So what is a missional church? This is how I define it: a believing community where every member is sent out into the world to participate in God's mission. Sometimes they use the word missio Dei, in God's mission, by living out redemptive lives. It takes time to unpack some of the key concepts. But important point here is that every member of a missional church understands that I am sent out into the world. So my sphere of ministry is not inside the church, but outside the church. That is, from Monday to Saturday, from 9 to 5, how I function as a person is is important, and we are the church outside the world. And participating in God's mission, we believe strongly that God is already at work in the world. We are not the ones creating work, creating mission. God is already doing it. Our job is to humbly come along and participate in what God is already doing. And we do this by living out redemptive lives. And so one example would be when you offer hospitality to someone you do not know. You never know. You could be participating in God's mission already. God is working in that person's life, and you, without knowing, you are actually doing what God wants to do through you. And you've read this book. J.D. Greer, pastor of a church in North Carolina, really is, to me, is the best example of a church, of a missional church in practice. I don't have time to develop these ideas, but so this is the Thai congregation, and this is CMCA work. Now, this is the Iranian community next door to the Korean community near Yonge and Finch and Yonge and Stills, that area, right? And I've always had burden for this community. Why? Because why is it that here in Toronto we have our Korean neighbors that are Persian speaking? And you may say, well, just so happened to be. Well, maybe there is something that God is telling us about. We ought to be neighbors. And for this reason, I'm so glad that Ali and some others are part of our community now, and we can do something through them. And in KM side, for the past 4 years, there's been an extensive work with Yazidi refugees. You recall in 2000, I believe 16, ISIS, remember that? ISIS, with people wearing all black stuff and very, they were even beheading people. Remember that group? Okay, their number one target, they were expanding their territory in North Iraq and North Syria, and their number one target was the Yazidis. Yazidis are neither Muslims nor Christians nor Jews. They're Yazidis, believing in Yazidism, which is a very old Mesopotamian folk religion. And so in the eyes of these ISIS, these, by the way, Yazidis are part of Kurdish people group, okay? And so these Yazidis are infidels. They need to be converted forcefully. Their men were all rounded up in a local school and given 3 hours to convert to Islam or face death by firing squad. And they chose death. Their women were all sold as sex slaves. We had about 50 or 60 families at the mercy of the Canadian government coming and living in Richmond Hill area. So we get a phone call from the refugee center. Can your church help? And team was organized, and that we have about 10 families in KM that have committed to this work for the past 4 years, and they're still going very strong. And they've invited some of them to our VBS and others. So again, CoaH we can dream, and we can think about how we can be a witness in GTA. As an example, I've given you Yazidi. So there are great books we can study further. I ended up writing a book myself in Korean, and maybe I can come up with some English translation at some point. But this book has been well received by churches in North America and in Korea. So I get to share what I believe is important, the importance of missional church. So moving forward, folks, this is what we should be doing, that building on a strong foundation of our forefathers, that we need to move on, and we need to make the best out of the resources that God has given us, both human and material resources. Like I said, this whole building is totally paid for. YoungNak Retreat Center, we still have some mortgage. I think about $800,000, something like that, but that will be paid off in a few years. But other than that, church is debt-free and doing very well, folks. And so we need to do more for the kingdom by continually making sure that the church exists for others. You may have some questions. Maybe I can go to Jim and have refreshment with you, and maybe you can ask some questions, because my time is up now. Yeah, I've gone 4 minutes over time, but then we didn't start on time. Yeah. Okay. Can I close in prayer? Yes. Father, we examined our forefathers and the kind of sacrifices that they've made for your kingdom. And Lord, what a privilege it is to stand with them. But at the same time, Lord, we realize that you have called us to continue to do good work as God's people who are eager to do what is good. So Lord, teach us and help us to live our lives that are worthy of your call. We thank you and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.